deep, and I'm going to go to a couple articles here. All right, shout out to people watching us on YouTube. All right, so we're broadcasting on YouTube also, our YouTube channel. And the DOJ under Jeff Sessions, and this is something that a lot of people who work in civil rights, who work in criminal justice reform, Black Lives Matter, etc., they were afraid of, okay, under Jeff Sessions. So news1.com and the Washington Post have a couple articles dealing with how the Department of Justice under Donald Trump, headed by Jefferson Beauregard Sessions III, okay, white segregationist out of Alabama, how they want to ramp up the war on drugs. Now, despite near historic crime lows, Jeff Sessions seeks to renew a racially biased policy that devastated black families. Jeff Sessions seeks to renew a racially biased policy that devastated black families. Okay, and Donald Trump continues to misstate the national crime rates. Okay, he continues to misstate the national crime rates and the national murder rate. If you look at the article from the Washington Post from I think it was in February, Trump makes false statement about U.S. murder rate to sheriff's group. Trump makes false statement about U.S. murder rate to sheriff's group. Okay, and in this article, this was back when this is from February 7th, 2017. So Donald Trump was meeting with members of the National Sheriff's Association. Okay, and when he was talking to them, he lied and said that the murder rate is the highest it's been, I guess, in 45 to 47 years, and that's not true. The national murder rate is at about a 45-year low. It's not the highest it's been in 45 years. When you had and also crimes nationwide, violent crimes, things like this, are at about a 45-year low. Now, you've had an uptick in like Chicago, Baltimore, things like this. But nationwide, violent crimes and murders are almost at historic lows. They're at about 45-year lows. Read this article from the Washington Post. Trump makes false statement about U.S. murder rate to sheriff's groups. Okay? So if he makes it false statement like that to sheriff's groups, then he'll make false statements like that in interviews, etc. Okay, and then when Jeff Sessions was took his oath of office, right? After he was approved by the Senate, he echoed these false claims about the crime rate. Okay. Now, this is what I was warning people about, and this is an example how elections have consequences. Now, the question I asked all the Negroes and pseudo-intellectual Negroes who told you don't vote for Hillary Clinton, vote for Jill Stein, write your name in, write Bernie Sanders' name in, all type of idiotic things like this. What are they telling you to do now? What are they telling you to do now? Now, Attorney General Jeff Sessions made criminal justice hardliner Stephen H. Cook, one of his top lieutenants at the Justice Department, signaling a return to the racially biased war on drugs policy that led to mass incarceration. And this was reported by the Washington Post. This article is from news1.com, April 10th, 2017. Do you believe Hillary Clinton had? Absolutely. And if you actually read the policies, you would know this. Did you read their policies? If you actually read their policies, I told people over and over and over again, I said, go to DonaldJTrump.com, read his 13, 14 policies. Go to HillaryClinton.com, read her 36 policies. Hillary Clinton had a criminal justice reform program. Donald Trump had no criminal justice reform program. Donald Trump did not talk about criminal justice reform. Donald Trump and Jeff Sessions and Donald Trump and Mike Pence did not even want to deal with the issue of implicit bias in policing. Mike Pence was on the campaign trail and he said that Donald Trump and I are tired of hearing about implicit bias. He said, we think there's too much talk about implicit bias. They don't even want to deal with this. If you actually go and read the policies, if you actually listen to the speeches, one of the first speeches Hillary Clinton gave was on criminal justice reform. If you get past the perception, if you actually do the fact checking, we did numerous fact checking weeks on end on this show. They're archived. We have over 700 podcasted episodes of our show. Go to AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. I can document what I've done. I can document what I say. I can document the information. If you actually go research this, you'll find out that she would have continued the winding down of the war on drugs and moving away from the privatized prisons, etc. This is fact. This is not perception. I can prove what I say. Go research this and go check out her website is still up, HillaryClinton.com, HillaryClinton.com. It's about policies, not personality. People got caught up on personality and they're about to declare war on your natural black ass. People got caught up on personality as opposed to focusing on policies. And this was a critical mistake. This is what happens when you lack strategy, you don't understand history, and you don't understand politics. You had Donald Trump told you he wanted to be the law and order candidate. If you understand the history of law and order, that goes back to Richard Nixon in 1968, when Richard Nixon ran on that platform, and he ran as a backlash to the Black Power movement, to the Civil Rights movement, to the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965. There was an entire backlash to that movement. Donald Trump ran as a backlash to 2 terms of President Barack Obama, the first African American president. He ran as a backlash to the Black Lives Matter movement. He ran as a backlash to the police reform movement, all that. He ran as a backlash to that. Now, if you actually do the research, and we've dealt with this here on this show, all these shows are archived, go back and listen to them. Roger Ailes, who was the founder of Fox News and got ousted out of Fox News for sexual harassment, and Fox News had to pay millions of dollars to settle a sexual harassment lawsuit. Roger Ailes was a campaign advisor to Richard Nixon in the 1968 presidential campaign. Okay? Richard Nixon's platform was law and order. And law and order translates into protect white people and lock up black people. That's what law and order translates into, if you actually understand history and do the research. Roger Ailes is also a good friend and was a campaign advisor, either formally or informally, to Donald Trump. So towards the end of the campaign, Donald Trump came out and said he wants to be the law and order candidate. He ran on a very pro-police platform. Not only did he run on a pro-police platform, not only has he said negative, disparaging things about Black Lives Matter, not only was he basically against consent decrees and things like this, he actually said that the police need more authority and they need more power, not less power. Okay, this is Donald J. Trump. So what you see being implemented, you could see the seeds being planted if you actually listen to his campaign speeches. I saw over 100 campaign speeches by Donald Trump. I saw over 100 campaign speeches by Donald Trump, and I went and read his policies. I saw dozens of interviews by him on top of that. So if you actually looked at this and connected the dots, you could see this coming. We got caught up on personality as opposed to focusing on policy. And you can't make that mistake again. You cannot make that mistake again. And when you have bad information, you make bad decisions. When you have bad information, you make bad decisions. And this is a mistake that black people make. And you had these stupid ass Negroes like Dr. Eddie Glaude on national TV, on MSNBC, saying he wasn't going to vote in the election, telling people don't vote for Hillary Clinton. And stupid ass Negroes like him, he can't tell you what to do now. They're about to declare war on your ass. He can't tell you what to do now. Okay, so according to the Washington Post, Jeff Sessions and Stephen Cook are formulating a policy to step up drug and gun prosecutions. They're formulating a policy to step up drug and gun prosecutions, as well as enforcing mandatory minimum sentence. Well, under President Obama, there was a move away from this. If you actually do the research, there was a move away from this. There was a winding down of the war on drugs. There's a move away from the mandatory minimums, move away from the privatized prison. All of this stuff. There was a winding down of the war on drugs under President Obama. I did a presentation. Okay, on YouTube, Jackson said, I definitely respect what you're saying. Post your comment again, Jackson. And please, people, do some research, because I can listen to what people say. I can tell what they haven't read. I can tell they haven't done the research. Okay? Read this article here from thinkprogress.org. Jeff Sessions began his term as Attorney General fear-mongering about crime and Muslims. Now, if you knew about Jeff Sessions prior to the election, you could see this stuff coming. Because Jeff Sessions, at one point, he was a campaign advisor to Donald Trump. And in Alabama, if I remember correctly, he headed up the Donald Trump campaign in Alabama. If you knew about this guy, this is the same guy who in 1986, it was deemed that he was too racist to be a federal judge. He was nominated by Ronald Reagan to be a federal judge in 1986. And Coretta Scott King, the widow of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., wrote a letter. She wrote a 9-page letter, okay, to the Senate Confirmation Committee, stating why Jeff Sessions should not be a federal judge and how him becoming a federal judge would undo Dr. King's legacy. This is who Jeff Sessions is. You got to study this stuff. Okay, so according to look at this article from thinkprogress.org. Okay, blah blah blah. There are saying that there were so many black people. Yeah, there were so many black people, and I think some of these Negroes got paid off to mislead us, and we should totally ostracize them. We should see. There's no penalty for selling us out. So you have these stupid ass Negroes who say nonsense like this and say don't vote. Or you have idiots who say things like, oh, well, not voting is a vote. Okay? Not voting may be a strategy, but it's a stupid strategy. Not voting may be a strategy, but it's a bad strategy. And now they can't tell you what to do. Because if you actually pay attention, you see all this stuff coming into place. You see all these pieces falling into place. And it's going to be worse than we thought it was going to be, if you actually research this. Okay, so according to the Washington Post, Jeff Sessions and Stephen Cook are formulating a policy to step up drug and gun prosecutions, as well as enforcing mandatory minimums. After working as a police officer, Stephen H. Cook became a federal prosecutor and served as president of the National Association of Assistant U.S. Attorneys. Okay, now most Negroes who sat at home and didn't vote, they don't even know who the hell Stephen Cook is. Most of them didn't know who Jeff Sessions was before he became Attorney General. A lot of them don't know who Jeff Sessions is now. But this is an example of how policy is going to impact your life. This is an example of how policy is going to impact your life, because politics is two main ways to understand politics. Number one, the legal distribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources. The legal distribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources. Number two, the writing of laws, statutes, ordinances, amendments, treaties, their adoption, interpretation, and enforcement. The writing of laws, statutes, ordinances, treaties, and amendments, their adoption, interpretation, and enforcement. Politics impacts every aspect of your life. Politics impacts every aspect of your life. So what we have to do is go beyond just voter education, because I'm a chair member of Grits in Politics here in Detroit. And we teach how politics impacts every aspect of your life. Okay? And teach people how to understand policy. And you have to go beyond just voter education. You have to have training sessions to teach people how politics impacts every aspect of their life, and how the writing of laws deals with the redistribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources. Okay, so after working as a police officer, Stephen Cook became a federal prosecutor and served as president of the National Association of Assistant U.S. Attorneys. He rejects the growing chorus of voices calling for criminal justice reform. At a Washington Post Criminal Justice Forum in 2016, Stephen H. Cook said the justice system is, quote, working exactly as designed, end quote. Now, it may be working exactly as designed, but it's not working for African Americans and poor people and people of color. Okay? So because it's working as maybe originally designed, does not mean that's a good thing. You've had significant reforms under the Obama administration, and Stephen Cook and Jeff Sessions were against these reforms. With the onslaught of the crack epidemic in the 1980s, Congress passed laws intended to get tough on crime. Former President Bill Clinton enacted a crime bill that included a three-strike rule that mandated life sentences. Now, what this article doesn't tell you, and what we've dealt with before on this show, is the crime bill, the 1994 crime bill that Clinton signed into law. First of all, Clinton didn't write the crime bill. The crime bill was written by Senator Joe Biden, who became Barack Obama's vice president. Joe Biden worked on the crime bill for 6 years. Okay? Clinton signed the crime bill September 13th, 1994, his second year in office. 87% of the people who went to prison under the 2 terms of Bill Clinton, they went under state law, not federal law. The crime bill was not state law. The crime bill was federal law. 13% went to prison under the crime bill, federal law. In the late 80s and early 90s, states had already started passing longer, harsher sentences. Before 1994, before the crime bill was signed into office, states had already started passing longer, harsher sentences in the late 80s and early 1990s, okay? This is what a lot of people don't understand. This is what a lot of people don't know. So they try to put all the blame on the crime bill. No, you got to study the history of this. The foundation of the school to prison pipeline was laid in 1986 under President Ronald Reagan with the drug-free zone and enforcement policy, something like that, a drug-free zone enforcement policy. That put police officers in the school in 1986 who are then going to start to disproportionately arrest African Americans and Hispanic students. That comes from Ronald Reagan and his war on drugs that he declared in 1982. The original war on drugs declared by Richard Nixon was June 17, 1971. And he lies in front of Congress, in front of his testimony in Congress, just like Harry J. Anslinger, who was the first chairman of the National Narcotics Commission, just like Harry J. Anslinger lied in front of Congress in 1937. And this is why marijuana became illegal in 1937, because prior to that, marijuana was legal. And it was made illegal because of a lie. So you have Richard Nixon, who declares his war on drugs based upon a lie. And if you look at the article from Harper's Weekly, April of 2016, the article by Dan Baum, B-A-U-M, called Legalize It All, in that article, he interviewed John Ehrlichman. Now, in that article, he talks about an interview that he did with John Ehrlichman in 1994, I think it was. So John Ehrlichman was Richard Nixon's domestic policy advisor. And he did 18 months in prison behind the Watergate scandal, his involvement in Watergate, okay? So John Ehrlichman tells Dan Baum, who's a journalist, he tells him, he said, do you really want to know what the war on drugs was about? And he said the war on drugs was basically an attack on the anti-war left, the hippies, who were protesting against the Vietnam War, and the African American community. He said we knew that we could not make it illegal to be against the war or to be black. But he said by associating marijuana with the hippies and the anti-war movement and associating heroin with the African American community, he said we could then raid their offices of their organizations, we could lock up their leaders, we could do surveillance on them, all different types of things like this. This is what the war on drugs was about, which and the war on drugs was declared by Richard Nixon, Mr. Law and Order himself, who became president in 1968 as a backlash to the Black Power movement, as a backlash to the Civil Rights movement, as a backlash to the changes in the protests against Vietnam, all that stuff. He became president as a backlash of that, and Donald Trump became president. He got support as a backlash to the Black Lives Matter movement, police reforms, what some people call anti-police movement, all that stuff. 2 terms of President Barack Obama, the first African-American president, etc. Now, he also got help from Russia. He got by with a little help from his friends, the Russian hacking, and also voter suppression. Okay? And then voter intimidation as well. Okay? And Trump won Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. The 3 battleground states. He won Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania by a total of 78,000 votes. He won those 3 states by less than 1/10 of a percentage point. He won Michigan by 2/10 of a percentage point. He won Michigan by 10,704 votes. Jill Stein got 50,000 votes out of Michigan. You figure that out. Jill Stein, who didn't have a snowball's chance in hell, who was at the 10th anniversary Russia Today TV gala in December of 2015, sitting at Vladimir Putin's table, sitting across the table from Vladimir Putin. Next to Vladimir Putin was Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, who became Donald Trump's national security advisor for 24 days. You put the pieces together. Why did Jill Stein, who very rarely says anything negatively about Vladimir Putin, why did she stay in the race all the way to the end when she was polling at 2%? So it was clear she wasn't going to win. Why did she stay in the race all the way to the end? Is it possible? Go back and listen to the podcast. I think it was in February. I did a show exposing Jill Stein, and I said, is it possible that Jill Stein stayed in the race until the end? Because it was clear she had no chance of winning. Is it possible she stayed in the race until the end to purposely take votes away from Hillary Clinton in key battleground states to then help Donald Trump win, which ultimately would help Vladimir Putin? Is that possible? Because when I look at the evidence, that's what it looks like to me. Now, also, Christopher Steele, who is the ex-MI6 agent, who was the one who put together the 35-page dossier on Donald Trump, he turns that dossier over to the FBI in summer 2016. When you read the article from BuzzFeed.com and other articles about this, Jill Stein's name is in that dossier because they're trying to figure out who paid for her to fly back and forth to Russia. Who paid for her accommodations when she was in Russia? Why was she there? So this house of cards is about to fall. One of the pieces fell today when it came out that there was a FISA warrant on Carter Page, who's a former advisor for Donald Trump. This was a breaking news story from the Washington Post, posted at 7:11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time today. We'll get to that in a minute. Now, those watching on Facebook, share this broadcast on your own Facebook page. Invite your friends to tune in. Those watching on Facebook, share this broadcast on your own Facebook page. Invite your friends to tune in. We posted the link to for our live international webinar. I'm doing a live international webinar coming up this Thursday. This Thursday, April 13th, 2017. Understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Okay, you can go ahead and register for that. It's a 4-week course. It's 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time each Thursday for 4 weeks. It's totally going to blow you away. We deal with ancient Kemet. We deal with Nubia, Ethiopia. We deal with Ghana, Songhai, Mali. We deal with the Moors, the 800-year occupation of Europe by the Africans known as the Moors. We deal with African people being indigenous to this land, being here at least 51,700 years. We deal with how what the Moors introduced into Europe is going to set up Columbus setting sail August 3rd, 1492 on the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, and how Columbus helps to lay the foundation for slavery, racism, capitalism, the exploitation of indigenous people, and opens up the so-called New World to other European nations coming in. Okay, at Eyes on Media. How you doing, brother? So we're going to post a link again. Now, those watching on YouTube, go to our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Go to AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. You can watch the you can register for it there and get more information. Okay, so let's continue with this. This is from the article from news1.com that they picked up from the Washington Post. Attorney General wants a return to war on drugs that led to mass incarceration. Attorney General wants a return to war on drugs that led to mass incarceration. Despite near historic crime lows, Jeff Sessions seeks to renew a racially biased policy that devastated black families. Right now, and also when you look at the article from, when you look at the article from thinkprogress.org, Jeff Sessions began his term as Attorney General fear-mongering about crime and Muslims. America isn't as scary and terrible as Trump and Sessions would have you believe. They're trying to scare the hell out of people, lie about the crime rate, so then they can draft laws based upon this false narrative that they're telling. Okay, Jeff Sessions began his first public comment after being sworn in as Attorney General with a boilerplate thank you to President Trump and an acknowledgement of the need to encourage Justice Department workers. He then immediately pivoted to echoing falsehoods his new boss, Donald Trump, has been pushing about crime and the threat posed by Muslims. Okay? Now, about 13%, about 13% of Muslims in the U.S. are African American. Okay, I think it's about 10%. About 10% are African American. About 23% of Muslims in the U.S. are black. About 10% are African Americans. Now, Jeff Sessions said, quote, "We have a crime problem. I wish the rise that we are seeing in crime in America today were some sort of aberration or a blip. My best judgment, having been involved in criminal law enforcement for many years, is that this is a dangerous permanent trend that places the health and safety of the American people at risk. Now, some cities like Chicago and New Orleans are suffering from short-term spikes in violence. This is true, but Jeff Sessions' claim about rising crime being a permanent trend is demonstrably false nationwide. He's lying. He's lying. Now, Sessions' claim is also false with respect to crime in U.S. cities in particular. Days after Donald Trump was inaugurated, he threatened to send the feds into Chicago to take care of the carnage occurring there. In his first comments as Attorney General, Jeff Sessions did not indicate whether he supports using federal power in that manner, which would likely be unconstitutional. But Sessions did express support for the national security rationale Trump has used to justify his Muslim ban, which indefinitely barred refugees and nationals from 7 Muslim majority countries from entering the country. Okay, all right. So check out this article. There's more to it, but these guys are just lying. These guys are just lying. All right. So the crime-fighting tactic that led to mass incarceration, 3 strikes and you're out, mandatory minimums, things like this, cost taxpayers $80 billion a year. Now, the criminal justice system warehoused African Americans in prison for drug offenses 10 times more than white Americans, even though African Americans and white Americans use drugs at roughly the same rate. Okay, so you have an over policing when it comes to African Americans. You have racial profiling, etc. But we use drugs at basically the same rate as white Americans. Now, African Americans also receive disproportionately longer prison sentences for minor drug offenses. Elected officials on the left and right eventually saw a need for reform. Okay, there was an effort for prison reform and criminal justice reform in the Senate, in Congress, that stalled. In Congress, that stalled. Elected officials on the left and right eventually saw a need for reform. Former President Barack Obama led the way, reducing the sentences of 1,715 low-level, nonviolent drug offenders to address the disparities, including crack versus powder cocaine sentencing, which devastated the African American community. Bipartisan criminal justice reform legislation was moving through Congress in 2015. Bipartisan criminal justice reform legislation was moving through Congress in 2015, but tough on crime lawmakers stepped on the brakes. The Washington Post pointed to Jeff Sessions, who was then a senator, U.S. senator in Alabama, as one of the fiercest reform opponents. Jeff Sessions helped put the brakes on the bipartisan criminal justice reform efforts that was taking place in Congress. And now he's Attorney General. The national crime rate has dropped to about half of what it was in 1991 when it was at its peak, according to the Brennan Center for Justice. Yet Jeff Sessions and others warn that a spike in places like Chicago signals a dangerous upswing. Now, Stephen H. Cook, who's one of Jeff Sessions' lieutenants in the Department of Justice, was among those who testified at congressional hearings that reforming the criminal justice system would be a mistake. He said, quote, "If hardline means that my focus is on protecting communities from violent felons and drug traffickers, then I'm guilty. I don't think that's hardline. I think that's exactly what the American people expect of their Department of Justice." Okay? So this is why elections have consequences. This is why you have to call your Congress people and U.S. senators on certain bills, criminal justice reform, things like this, to tell them vote no on this, vote yes on this, because they pay attention to that. We saw that example with the Affordable Health Care Act in the attempt to repeal it. And people were calling and shut down the congressional switchboard. They were emailing, they were calling, and senators and members of the U.S. House of Representatives, they keep a log on how many calls do they get that say vote no, how many calls do they get that say vote yes, how many emails they get, things like this. They get and usually their vote is based upon that. When there's overwhelming outpouring, people were showing up at town hall meetings, furious. People were calling, things like this. That has a big impact. See, we have to understand the different ways to engage. Download the document Indivisible. Indivisible. Go to indivisibleguide.com. Indivisibleguide.com. Download Indivisible. Because a lot of these people organize based upon that. Okay? There are I'm not sure what you said. Now, check out this article from Washington Post. How Jeff Sessions wants to bring back the war on drugs. April 8th, 2017. How Jeff Sessions wants to bring back the war on drugs. Because in the article, in the section, okay, well, first of all, under President Obama, they had an initiative called Smart on Crime, okay? President Obama, the first sitting president to visit a federal prison, launched an ambitious clemency initiative to release certain drug offenders from prison early. And Attorney General Eric Holder told his prosecutors, in an effort to make punishments more fairly fit the crime, to stop charging low-level nonviolent drug offenders with offenses that impose severe mandatory sentences. Okay? This happened under the Obama administration. All these ignorant ass Negroes who sit up here and say Obama didn't do anything for black people. When did you go research this information? When did you go research this information? The people, and then when you see Jeff Sessions and Donald Trump putting things in place to undo what President Obama did, how can you undo something that wasn't done in the first place? Following your line of thinking, which is not consistent with facts and reality. See, we have to go research this because we cannot let something like this happen again. President Obama, the first sitting president to visit a federal prison, launched an ambitious clemency initiative to release certain drug offenders from prison early. Okay, and these are people who have been in prison 20, 30 years. Okay, going back to the 80s, going back to the 90s, things like this. And Attorney General Eric Holder told his prosecutors, in an effort to make punishments more fairly fit the crime, to stop charging low-level nonviolent drug offenders with offenses that impose severe mandatory sentences. Under Jeff Sessions, they're about to reverse that and try to give people as much time as possible and go after low-level nonviolent drug offenders. Stephen Cook says there's no such thing as a nonviolent drug offender. Now, Stephen Cook called this strategy outlined in the August 2000. President Barack Obama called his strategy outlined in an August 2013 report, Smart on Crime. Okay? The strategy was called Smart on Crime. Stephen Cook called it Soft on Crime. And he said the Chattanooga case, early in the article, they talk about a Chattanooga case as a drug case. He said the case would have been much more difficult to make, quote, if possible at all, end quote, in recent years. Okay, now Stephen Cook has also dismissed the idea that there is a such thing as a nonviolent drug offender. He said, quote, drug trafficking is inherently violent. Drug traffickers are dealing in heavy cash business. He said this on on Bill O'Reilly's show, The O'Reilly Factor, last year. Bill O'Reilly has lost 80 advertisers as of yesterday. He's lost 80 advertisers from his show behind the article that appeared in the New York Times 2 weekends ago about $13 million he and Fox News has paid out to settle sexual harassment lawsuits to 5 women. And Lisa Bloom, who is an attorney for one of the women, who's an attorney for a woman who has filed a sexual harassment lawsuit against them, she says there's other women as well. Okay? But Stephen Cook said they can't resolve disputes in court. They resolve the disputes on the street, and they resolve them through violence. Now, Stephen Cook and Jeff Sessions have also fought the winds of change on Capitol Hill when a bipartisan group of lawmakers recently tried but failed to pass the first significant bill on criminal justice reform in decades. After GOP lawmakers became nervous about passing legislation that might seem soft on crime, Senator Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, Republican from Kentucky, son of a Mitch, declined to bring the bill to the floor for a vote. The criminal justice reform that got bipartisan support, it came to a stall. Now, Jeff Sessions was the main reason that the bill did not pass, said Iniami Chedier, the director of the Justice Program at the Brennan Center for Justice. Okay? Quote, he came in at the last minute and really torpedoed the bipartisan effort. End quote. Now that he is Attorney General, Jeff Sessions has signaled a new direction. As his first step, Sessions told his prosecutors in a memo last month, March of 2017, to begin using quote unquote every tool we have, language that evoked the strategy from the drug war of loading up charges to lengthen sentences. Begin using every tool we have. Now, this is language that evoked the strategy from the war on drugs of loading up charges to lengthen sentences. Read the full article on WashingtonPost.com. How Jeff Sessions wants to bring back the war on drugs. How Jeff Sessions wants to bring back the war on drugs. Now, we know that with the consent decrees in Baltimore, we know that a federal judge ruled last Friday. The federal judge approved the consent decree with the Baltimore Police Department last Friday, turning it into a court order. The judge blocked a request from the Trump Justice Department to delay the agreement because Jeff Sessions is against police consent decrees. He's against them. Okay. Attorney General Jeff Sessions says an Obama era agreement between the Department of Justice and Baltimore to bring reform to its police force could make the city less safe. That's not true. Sessions blasted the decision. He said, quote, today a federal court entered a consent decree that will require the court and a highly paid monitor to govern every detail of the Baltimore Police Department functions for the foreseeable future. Okay, this decree was negotiated during a rushed process by the previous administration and signed only days before they left office. While the Department of Justice continues to fully support police reform in Baltimore, what support have you given to police reform in Baltimore? I have grave concerns that some provisions of this decree will reduce the lawful powers of the police department and result in a less safe city. Okay. Now, Jeff Sessions, DOJ, had filed a request in the U.S. District Court of the District of Maryland on Monday, okay, last week Monday, asking for 90 more days to review the consent decree with the Baltimore Police Department. Now, when you look at the article from April 6, 2017 from NBCnews.com, Justice Department cites grave concerns about Baltimore police reform, okay? They talk about how, I think it's in this article, they talk about how the police chief in Baltimore is for the consent decree, and so is the mayor. The new mayor, Catherine Pugh, okay, who was a state representative. So, I think she was a state senator or state representative. Signs of a Justice Department turnaround on a sweeping set of police reforms in Baltimore became more apparent on Thursday, with a federal lawyer telling a judge the Trump administration now has grave concerns about a consent decree negotiated under former President Barack Obama. The lawyer, John Gore. Now, John Gore, if I remember correctly, John Gore is going to head up the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice. But John Gore doesn't have a good background or good record on civil rights. They're putting people in charge of these departments that are the antipathy of what the department represents. And they're putting them in place to destroy these departments. Okay. Reformers, including Baltimore's police commissioner, say that the changes will improve safety by rebuilding trust between the police and the public. Baltimore's consent decree is a result of the Justice Department investigation prompted by the rioting that erupted following the April 2015 death of Freddie Gray while in police custody. Investigators from the Division of Civil Rights found a pattern of unconstitutional stops, searches, and arrests of African-American residents and the use of unnecessary force against them. The investigators traced the problems to a 1990s era crime fighting strategy aimed at the drug trade. This goes back to the war on drugs. Okay? So you got to study the history of this and how these policies had a negative impact. All the social ills that we are dealing with today, basically, all the social ills we're dealing with today are the side effects, usually of bad policies, of bad laws. The social ills that we're dealing with. The reason why you have, one of the main reasons why you have a lack of African American males in the home, African American fathers in the home, is because of the war on drugs. You have the war on drugs. You also had automation put into factories, which eliminated a lot of low-level positions that we got and our fathers got and grandfathers got when they moved up here from Mississippi and Alabama, things like this. Okay? But a lot of the social ills that we deal with are the side effects of bad policies written in the law by politicians. This is why we have to have training, and we have to have sessions and forums that teach our people how politics impacts every aspect of your life. The water you drink, the food you eat, the air you breathe is all regulated by law. It's all regulated by policies. Okay? Okay. So, Less than 4% of the sidewalk stopped. Okay, let me back. They found so in the DOJ report of the Baltimore Police Department, I think it was like 163 pages. They found hundreds of thousands of pedestrian stops for minor offenses with minimal or no suspicion of law breaking, all concentrated in African American neighborhoods. Because when you read the DOJ report of Baltimore, they tell you that there were two Baltimores. There were two Baltimores. There was a Baltimore where white people lived, and there's a section of Baltimore where white people lived, and they got along with the police, and basically everything was fine. And then there was the African American section of Baltimore, where you had all of these offenses taking place. They found hundreds of thousands of pedestrian stops for minor offenses with minimal or no suspicion of law breaking, all concentrated in black neighborhoods. Less than 4% of the sidewalk stops resulted in arrests. Less than 4%. Let me listen to this. In the Department of Justice, when they investigated the patterns and practices of the Baltimore Police Department, they found hundreds of thousands of pedestrian stops for minor offenses with minimal or no suspicion of law breaking. All of this was concentrated in the African American neighborhoods. Less than 4% of the sidewalk stops resulted in an arrest. So they were racially profiling the people. Less than 4% of the sidewalk stops actually resulted in an arrest. Glenda Laddie said, I heard Bernie Sanders wrote the bill for black men to go to jail for minor drug offenses, and Bill Clinton signed it. Bernie Sanders didn't write the bill. Bernie Sanders voted for the crime bill in '94. Bernie Sanders was a member of the U.S. House of Representatives. Bernie Sanders had been in Congress for 25 years. He started in the U.S. House of Representatives in 1991. Then in 2007, he went to the U.S. Senate. It was Senator Joe Biden who wrote the crime bill. Senator Joe Biden, who became Barack Obama's vice president, worked on that crime bill for 6 years. Joe Biden was the chief architect and main sponsor of the 1994 crime bill. That was Senator Joe Biden. It was Joe Biden who said we have to have harsher, longer sentences in the crime bill to get Republicans to vote for it. That was Joe Biden. So African American drivers suffered similarly. They were disproportionately pulled over for traffic stops and searched for drugs, even though officers found illegal substances more often in searches involving white drivers. Go read the Baltimore police report from the DOJ about Baltimore. African American drivers were disproportionately pulled over for traffic stops and searched for drugs in Baltimore, even though officers found illegal substances more often in searches of white drivers. The Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice, which has negotiated similar arrangements in 24 other cities, this is under President Barack Obama, because under President Obama, there were more investigations into the patterns and practices of the police departments than any previous administration. They had 24 of them. There were more investigations into the patterns and practices of police departments under the Obama administration than any previous administration. Now you got Jeff Sessions, who's against these investigations, who's against these consent decrees, and you got Donald Trump who's against them, and Donald Trump was endorsed by the Fraternal Order Police as a presidential candidate, which is the largest police union in the country. They have 300,000 members. The Civil Rights Division, which has negotiated similar arrangements in 24 other cities, threatened to sue the city of Baltimore unless it agreed to reform itself. Baltimore agreed, and they signed a consent decree that will put the city under a court-appointed monitor. Okay, because when they have these consent decrees, there's federal oversight over these consent decrees to make sure that the police department is doing the reforms that they agree to. Now, such deals typically last years and cost many millions of dollars. So there was one city council member in Baltimore. We talked about Ferguson a couple of nights ago. There's one city council member who estimated that it will cost between $75 to $100 million, $75 to $100 million to implement all of the reforms that needed to take place. We have to understand elections have consequences. Local, state, and national. Elections have consequences. Now download go to RolandSmartin.com, RolandSmartin.com, and download the agenda that the Congressional Black Caucus put together, called "We Have a Lot to Lose." We have a lot to lose, because there are elements in there that every African American organization across the country, whether you are a civil rights organization, whether you're Black Lives Matter, whether you are a block club, what have you, you can take elements from that and create a powerful agenda. Okay, you can create a powerful agenda. Let me set my DVR up because I'm missing Brian Williams on MSNBC, The Last Word, and I missed Lawrence O'Donnell because he was talking about this other story we're about to get to, and I missed. I saw part of the Rachel Maddow show, so I need to set up my DVR to record these so I can go back and watch them. So just give me a minute here, because they're done with this other story about to get into about Carter Page. And as I've been telling people, the walls are closing in on Donald Trump. I don't think he's going to make it to the end of the year. I think he's going to be forced to resign. He does not want to be impeached. He does not want to be put on trial, because impeachment does not mean that you're removed from office. It means that you're put on trial. The last thing a pathological liar wants to happen is that you put on trial under oath, penalty of perjury. That's the last thing a pathological liar wants to happen. Okay. All right. So, I had it bound also, Greg. That is a powerful document. It's a 125-page agenda. We have a lot to lose. Solutions solutions for 21st century African American families. Then also download Indivisible. Download the Indivisible document as well. Okay. Vernon Thomas said we should have formed our own party to back them off President Obama. Well, you can have a party within a party. If you study the Tea Party was not a separate party. The Tea Party was very effective. They were a party within the Republican Party. They were further to the right than a lot of Republicans, and it pulled the Republican Party further to the right. Okay, if you look at, so we can have a party within the Democratic Party. We can have a force within the Democratic Party, but we have to understand politics. We have to have strategy. We have to have an agenda. Okay. Download Indivisible. Go to indivisibleguy.com. Download that, because that is something that's being used right now. And then when you deal with the Department of Justice, right? When you deal with the DOJ and these laws, things that they don't want to look at is the causes of crime. Okay? Because when we look at the we talked about this I think on yesterday's show, or day before yesterday. You look at the study from you look at the study called The Cost of Segregation. The Cost of Segregation. This study deals with how billions in lost wages and thousands of young people without the education they need to fulfill their potential This deals with the cost of segregation in America, okay, and how segregation costs America billions of dollars each year. It costs African Americans a lot of lost opportunity. It increases the homicide rate in Chicago. Segregation increases the homicide rate by 30%. Okay, it also leads to a reduction in the number of African Americans with bachelor's degrees, and also a reduction in the number of people in general with bachelor degrees. And when you have a reduction in bachelor degrees, you have an increase in crime and an increase in the murder rate as well. So check out this study. This is go to metroplanning.org. Metroplanning.org. Go to metroplanning.org and download this study. It's a 20-page study, The Cost of Segregation. The Cost of Segregation. There's an article from AtlantaBlackStar.com about this also. We talked about this the other day. Segregation results in loss of money, low education, high mortality for everybody. Segregation results in loss of money, lower education, high mortality for everybody. Check out this study. They looked at, this was a 20-page study from 1990 to 2010. And they looked at 100 cities across the country, including Atlanta, Chicago, New York, okay? And they discovered that racial segregation impacts African Americans the most economically and results in increased homicide rates among African Americans. So check this out. This is a deep study. So when we are putting together agendas, studies like this have to be incorporated into an agenda, because what they're talking about is segregation of opportunity, segregation of resources that our tax dollars help pay for. They're talking about segregation of resources. It's not saying that our life would be great if we could live next door to white people. This is talking about something much deeper. Okay, so check out that article. Segregation results in loss of money, lower education, high mortality for everybody. All right. Okay, we're going to go to this next story because we're going to start broadcasting on YouTube. But those watching on YouTube, visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. We have the information there for our live webinar that starts this Thursday, April 13th, 2017, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. This is a 4-week course, 2 hours each week, every Thursday, and these are recorded. These are recorded. You can go back and watch them over and over and over again, okay? So we have the information at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. We're going to post it again here on the thread of the broadcast on Facebook Live also, so you can register for that, okay? Now, who watching us on Facebook and who watching us on YouTube, who is registered for the course that's starting Thursday? Who is registered for the course starting Thursday? Okay, so when I deal with the transatlantic slave trade, I deal with it differently than a lot of people. I deal with it chronologically as opposed to an episode in history. Okay, it didn't just pop up in history. It's the result of previous historical events taking place. Okay, so when we deal with the transatlantic slave trade, we first have to understand that African people are the indigenous people of North, Central, and South America. We are the indigenous people of North, Central, and South America. The Khoisan have the oldest DNA on the planet. The Khoisan come from Southern Africa. They go all around the world. They are the ancestors to the Ainu and the Twa. The Twa are referred to oftentimes in anthropology and archaeology as the Pygmies. Okay, but the Khoisan were here in this land. You're going to have a presence from ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt here as well. You're going to have voyages from this land, we call the United States, back and forth to Africa. In 2004, Dr. Albert Goodyear, um, um, Dr. Albert Goodyear made a discovery in Allendale County, South Carolina, and discovered an African presence dating back at least 51,700 years ago. So we can't start our history starting in slavery. Okay, this was our land taken away from us. We were here before Native Americans came into existence. So when I deal with the transatlantic slave trade, I deal with it chronologically, as opposed to it episodically, as opposed to episodic history. We also have to deal with the 800-year occupation by Europe by the Africans known as the Moors, who are going to introduce science and almanacs and spherical globes and different types of musical instruments, nautical instruments, navigational instruments, all different types of things like this. And they're taking into Europe the teachings from the ancient Kemetic mystery system or the ancient Egyptian mystery system. And their teachings are going to bring Europe out of the Dark Ages. And this is going to help set the foundation and help set the scene for Christopher Columbus, or Cristobal Colon, to be able to set sail on his 4 voyages starting August 3rd, 1492. And Columbus so-called discovering the New World and uncovering countries like Jamaica and Haiti and Puerto Rico and Cuba, things like this. This is going to open up the New World and lay the foundation for slavery, racism, capitalism, the exploitation of indigenous people, and open up the New World for these other European nations that come in and fight over this new land, because Europe is trying to rebuild itself. They're coming out of the Dark Ages and they're trying to rebuild themselves. So this is what we deal with. This is why it's in 4 parts. It's 8 hours. All the sessions are recorded. You can go back and watch it over and over again. It's only $40. Visit AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Information is there on Facebook. Okay, Greg Osborne said Saturday session was awesome. All right, thanks, Greg, because we have another section, but we have a new section. We have a new class starting up this Thursday, session number 1, 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. You go ahead and register for that today. Those on YouTube, go to AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. And those listening on Blog Talk Radio, you can go to AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. We have the information there. Those on Facebook, we posted the link here on the thread. You go ahead and register for that. Make sure you have pen and pad handy. Come ready to learn, because I have a lot of information that's going to totally blow you away. All right. Okay. All right. Who's this? Okay, Parks on YouTube. Okay, guys, we got to get out of here from YouTube. We'll be back in a few minutes. All right. So we'll start broadcasting on YouTube.